It's funny looking back at these lenses now. Before I owned this set of lenses, the anamorphic look has always just been something that I've just admired from the distance. It's probably the look that a lot of us filmmakers kind of want to emulate. Remember those black bars? That look is because of anamorphic lenses. When we think of anamorphic lenses, we associate them with cinema. But every time I've looked into anamorphic lenses, they've always just seemed so expensive. They've always seemed so big, always felt just out of reach, especially the good kind of anamorphic lenses. Now, Sirui is the kind of company that's been coming out with budget anamorphic lenses. And since then, anamorphic has stopped feeling like it's reserved for bigger productions, and it's felt a little bit more attainable for content creators, for freelancers or solo shooters, or smaller productions. Enter the Sirui Saturn series. Now, this isn't a first impressions review. I've brought them on countless shoots. These lenses have actually lived in my kit for a few months now. So what we're gonna go through is what they do well, what they don't do well, and if I could recommend these lenses to you in 2026 going into 2027. The Saturn series was clearly designed for mirrorless filmmakers in mind, and that's probably the biggest reason these lenses have become so popular. Depending on the focal length, they're roughly around 500 grams, and that's absurdly light for full-frame anamorphic lenses. They do come in an all-metal build, except for that ring of carbon fiber that I do think is probably for even more weight savings, which is, again, pretty insane. Whether you're shooting with these lenses handheld or on a gimbal, you can also throw these on the DJI Ronin. They basically disappear on your rig, which is, again, pretty crazy that you can do that with anamorphic lenses. The comfort of using these lenses, it's really hard to beat. Across the set, you do get consistent gearing, which makes it a lot easier for lens swapping. And you get an almost consistent front diameter or filter thread, 62 for the 50 and the 75 mm, and then you get 58 for the 35 mm. Why it's different, I'm not so sure. I wish that they were more consistent. I think that's one of the drawbacks with being a budget set of lenses. That's probably the biggest part that I feel like would be a hassle with these lenses. So if you're gonna put diopters on there or an ND filter, you're gonna have to buy different sized filters. Now with these lenses also, you do get 120 degrees of focus throw, which isn't a lot. Ideally with cinema lenses, you'd rather want more focus throw, so you can really get to nail critical focus. I think just physically, because it's so compact, you can't get that amount of focus throw with these lenses. So it does make it pretty hard to nail critical focus at times, but I'll say more about that later on. But even with those trade-offs, everything does still feel very cohesive. It still feels like it's designed as a set, which is really important. Sirui. I'm butchering this. One thing Sirui did exceptionally well with the Saturn series of lenses is balancing sharpness and character. Because the reality is, most modern cameras are plenty sharp already. And filmmakers don't really need more sharpness. Sometimes filmmakers want more personality. And these lenses do a pretty good job at doing both. There's more than enough character, but they're also pretty dang sharp when they need to be. Even wide open, the center is surprisingly sharp, more than sharp enough for commercial or client work, which is, again, really important. All of the lenses have a t2.9 aperture, and with that 120 degrees of focus throw, like I said, it does make it kind of hard to nail critical focus at times. From an operating standpoint, but also visually. Specifically on the wider focal lengths, the background stays relatively sharp. So judging focus by focus peaking in camera or on a monitor can present some difficulty. But when you do nail that focus, it does really produce a sharp enough image. So let's talk about one of the things everyone buys anamorphic lenses for. The bokeh. The Saturns use a 1.6x squeeze factor, and that extra squeeze compared to most entry-level anamorphic lenses, which have a 1.33 or a 1.5x squeeze, these lenses do have a noticeable difference. The oval bokeh is obvious. It's a lot closer to that traditional 2x anamorphic look because of that squeeze factor. And this was the first thing that I noticed about these lenses. I do think it's right in between where I want it to be. It's close enough to the 2x look, being that it's 1.6 and not 1.33 or 1.5, which kind of leans more spherical in some budget anamorphic lenses. So that's one of the things that I really love about this lens is that squeeze factor. Now on a 16:9 sensor like my FX3, sometimes it can get really stretched, and then you'd have to kind of crop in a little bit to get to that 2:3.5 or 2:3.9 aspect ratio. And then you have kind of room on the sides to play around with. Now my favorite of the set for bokeh is the 75. I think it just really produces a beautiful separation between your subject and the background. You get more of that anamorphic language, having the bokeh a little bit more oval in shape, and kind of have that waterfall effect in the background. And I think the wider that you go, that separation isn't as apparent, and then the bokeh tends to round out. But even then, it's still much closer to the 2X look. The flare on the Saturns is probably one of its most recognizable characteristics, and thankfully it's tasteful. You get that classic horizontal streak, but it doesn't completely overwhelm the image. And that's due in part because of it being neutral coated. Now you can get the Saturn lenses in a blue coating, but with the ones that I have here, they're neutral coated, so they take on the color of the light source that you pointed at. I've always preferred a little bit more of a subtle flare in my anamorphic lenses, and that's exactly what these lenses present. You can get dramatic flares when you want them, but they're not screaming for attention in the frame, which makes it great for client work, because sometimes blue flares can be a little bit more distracting, especially if the client doesn't really understand anamorphics. That's something that us filmmakers just really nerd about. So having them a little bit more controlled, I feel like they stay useful for longer, even when the novelty wears off. Focus breathing is surprisingly pretty controlled for the price point. There is still some visible breathing, no surprises there, especially on the 35, but it's rarely enough that it's distracting, especially when you're doing handheld work or you have some movement in your frame. Focus breathing isn't really something that I worry about with these lenses. These lenses do have some distortion in it. Now, distortion with anamorphic lenses is kind of part of the language, so I'm not really worried about distortion here. Again, it's part of the character of anamorphic lenses. Now, when you think of anamorphic lenses, usually you'll think about barrel distortion, and these lenses are the opposite, and it's probably not my preferred distortion for anamorphic lenses. They have a pincushion distortion, which kind of compresses everything in the middle, and then the lines towards the edges kind of squeeze inward. But usually, again, anamorphic lenses would have that barrel distortion, which I personally prefer. Now, the color rendering on these lenses, I haven't had much of a problem with it. They've been consistent throughout the set, whether that's the 35, the 50, or the 75. I do feel sometimes that the 35 might lean a little bit warmer, but that's not something that's difficult to correct in post. So handling this on a rig or a gimbal, this is where the Saturns really shine. So if you're a solo shooter or a content creator, if you're a freelancer, or if you're a smaller production, I think these lenses would be amazing to have in your kit, because all of the beautiful bokeh and flares in the world won't matter if the lenses stay in the case. And these lenses almost never stay in the case for me. I've always gravitated to just bringing them with me wherever I go, just because of how compact they are, how packable they are. So when it comes to pricing, the Sirui website, they often go on sale. I got all of these on sale, so again, anamorphics are very, very attainable now. So after all this time, would I recommend these lenses? Absolutely. I think they are the best bang for buck anamorphic lenses that you can start with as a filmmaker. If you're looking into your first set of anamorphic lenses, I think these would be perfect. They will teach you anamorphic language without, breaking your bank or your back. They are really good to pack in a backpack and just travel with and create and shoot with. And I think that's entirely the point here, is that if these lenses make you more creative and make you want to shoot more, then I think you can say you've got a pretty good set of lenses. Now, the Sirui Saturn lenses aren't my last anamorphic set of lenses, but they are the set of lenses that have convinced me that anamorphic can finally be part of my workflow. And honestly, that's probably the most important review I can give them. So I will compare these set of lenses to another set of anamorphic lenses, the DZO Arcana. If that video is already out, I'll be linking it here. But if it's not out, it will be. So make sure you catch that, hit that subscribe button. So if you think you're gonna pick up anamorphic lenses as part of your kit, let me know in the comments. And if you've liked this video, please do give it a thumbs up. See you in the next one.